Well, good morning to you all. This feels very much like being at church in the Church of England. I see. Do you like it on Sundays when this happens to you? When there's no one up front? So my name's Clive. I am one of the associate archdeacons. The remaining ones are here. Give us a wave if you're an associate archdeacon. There they are. If you don't know who the rest of the team are, you might only know who your one is. And I am not an expert in the material that I'm presenting today. We were all offered some training, and I just forgot to step back when we were waiting for someone to attend a meeting. And here we are. But this is to do with oversight and the passage that we've just heard. Print it out, laminate it, put it above your workstation, because oversight is a biblical model of ministry that we are all involved in, whether or not we walk around with the badge that says Oversight Minister on our chest. We're all exercising oversight. We do it with humility, and we also do it under authority. And so this is meant to be something that will help you in your exercise of oversight, but also hopefully help you to be overseen. Because you'll be coming at this from different places, you'll be at different ages and stages of your ministry with different roles. And the intention is that this is being offered as something that you may give, but also something that you may receive. So if you can recognise it, then you can kind of go along with it and work out what you can gain from it. Because oversight ministry, the model that we are moving towards here in the Diocese of Sheffield, is not about abrogating responsibility. Find someone else to do all the stuff, so you're not going to do it. But neither is it about micromanagement. Get other people to do the stuff, but you may as well have done it yourself because you're involved and you've got your sticky fingers in everything that's going on. There's a kind of balance between the two to be able to release people into their God-given gifts. And it's a challenge. You know, it's why our role exists, is to try and help people to take this journey about how do we navigate this releasing people into without putting a burden on and without us letting go. How do we properly carry out a role of overseeing or allowing others to oversee? So I hope that by the end of today, you will feel in some way better equipped for your role, whatever it may be. And you've probably got your own views about where the balance between freedom and control is. And I don't want to challenge your views, but you may find them challenged in that you may feel better equipped to find a balance between control and release of those who you are overseeing. And in the spirit of the Great Commission, I hope that your relationship as an oversight minister, or your relationship in whatever role it is of being overseen, will be in some way a place where you and your teams and your team members are growing as disciples and are better equipped to make disciples. So this is all about discipleship. It's not just a management tool. And so I hope that you will feel encouraged and nurtured, and that after today others will feel encouraged and nurtured as well. So in sharing these resources, we recognise, as a team of associate archdeacons, I speak on behalf of the archdeacons, that this was just, what I'm sharing is just something that we were given. We didn't come up with it. We were given a whole load of stuff. Some of you were on that. Who was on that 30 days? It felt like 30 days, 30 hours. So we were given training by 3D Coaching, and we were given a lot of material. And so what we did was we tried to distill the bits of the material into a useful package, the bits that are relevant to us, that we can use. Because the point is that we're all in different contexts, and we're all going to find different things useful in terms of how we relate to people. And so you may already be having good, productive, purposeful conversations with people, and in which case you may say thanks but no thanks. But even if you say thanks but no thanks, you've got something in your pocket that you might go, well, I might try that at some point. So again, I don't want you to change tack if you think you're doing something better than what you get today. But this coaching model is about just being able to introduce purpose into our conversations. And my title for this first session was Structuring It Without It Getting Weird. Because it can sometimes feel weird. The first time I sat down with someone who had done the training as well, and I asked one of the questions verbatim from the training, and the person just kind of puckered their lips and went, "Oh, you're doing that coaching thing on me now, aren't you?" So this isn't going to train you to be a coach, and hopefully it's not going to get rid of the natural relationships that you have and the elements that you have within your relationships. It's just a toolkit. It's a quick skim of a 10-week course that we did with a framework to help you to have better conversations. Ideally in a one-to-one context. It can be used in other settings, but really the way that I'm presenting this to you now is one-to-one conversations. And hopefully it will help with working with your lay leaders, or if you're, whoever you have oversight of, or if you receive oversight, it will help in your conversations. So there are learning outcomes. It's good to have learning outcomes, and hopefully by the end of today you will understand why it's good to structure a conversation in order to give it purpose, and then to know what the structure is that I'm going to share with you. It's called CLEAR. So that will be there. You'll have some skills in terms of how to create that structure, how to listen and understand what you're being heard. You'll be able to identify ways of exploring issues with people, and you'll understand the need to check back in and review it at the end. If you've got any of that at the end, then you've learned something, which is great. So you're going to get the overview in this first session before coffee. And we'll focus on this, creating a kind of container of a conversation. And there'll be an opportunity to practice a skill of creating a container. It's got a really whizzy name, and all will become clear when we get there. And hopefully it'll just give you a bit of confidence in how to do that. And then in the second session, after our first comfort break, we're going to look at the art of listening. And we've got all sorts of fun exercises. Has anyone ever done listening exercises where you do like exercises? We're going to do some of those anyway, and you're going to have to be imaginative in it. So if any of you like telling stories, or telling lies even, then session 2 is for you. You're going to really enjoy it. Some of it may feel a bit old hat, but hopefully it will be a time of being able to have fun. And it can't hurt to be reminded about the importance of active listening. And then in the third session, we'll explore where you go once you've opened up a conversation and heard what people are saying. So just exploring it and looking at review. Now, after lunch, we're going to have an opportunity to reflect, which is what normally happens with a silent reflection, and then discuss things in tables and have a plenary session. That's all we've got after lunch. I am open to negotiate the timetable after lunch. In terms of, we could eat and then just work out how long you want to discuss it, or whether you just want a plenary discussion, or whether you just want to go home. So you'll know by the time we get to lunch how we're feeling. I won't take it personally, but I don't think we need to spend too long, but it just depends where you're at with it, if you've got more questions. And we'll get the other AATs up at that point if you're going to ask questions, because they'll probably be able to give better answers than I can. So, we're going to be looking at, I was going to put up my learning outcomes. Look, there they are. That's what you will have learned by today. You will get these slides by magic at 1 o'clock in your inboxes, together with your forms that you need to fill out evaluating the day. So we're going to look at creating a structure. Now, when we meet with people who we are in community with, then inevitably we have all sorts of different relationships with them and different things that are going to happen in terms of that conversation. We are not coaches, and so we have We may have relationships that are based on power and authority. We may have relationships that are based on shared story. We may have relationships that are based on shared roles, shared functions, whatever they may be. And so to go straight into a purposeful conversation where you're creating a structure is something that a coach might do because they sit outside of your life and your context, whatever it may be. But we share life with people. We do life with people. And so this is the really, really important bit. Do not make it weird if you're going to do this stuff. If you have other things that need talking about, or that you want to talk about, do it. So before you even get to this idea of structure, if you need to reflect on what happened in church yesterday, do it. If you need to find out whether or not they had a good dog walk this morning, or how their family are doing, or any of that kind of stuff, or you just want to talk about what you saw on the telly, do it. Because you're in relationship, and part of all of this, it works best if you have that relationship and recognise it. If you pretend you haven't, is when it gets weird. And this is why, when I was sat with someone who we normally talked in a different way, went on the training, and I said, I can't even remember which question it was. I went, you're doing that coaching thing on me. It got weird. Whereas hopefully now, if I would say to him, do you want me to do that coaching thing? And he'd go, yeah, actually, I think that might be helpful. Because it's not weird, because we've already done all the small talk kind of stuff. So do make sure that you use all your small talk. Allow people to offload. Make sure that they're present. Make sure that you've prayed. Make sure that you're aware of their feelings and whatever else is going on, or their distractions, or whatever it may be. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to have a purposeful conversation. It's going to be weird. So, at some point, a decision needs to be made about whether or not you're going to get into a transformational conversation. Not managerial, not checking in, not pastoral, transformational. And so that decision might be made by you, or it might be made by them. It's probably best phrased as a question. Shall we get into the transformational bit now? Would you like to? That kind of thing. So you can just ask the question, would you like this conversation? Do you just want to whinge about what Mr. Miggins said yesterday at the communion rail, or whatever, or just before you started your service? Or do you want to do something else? And if so, that's what we can do at this point. And so we can create a structure. It's called clear. Hopefully that's clear. Why it's called clear. And the idea behind this graphic is that this is a lozenge. Okay, so it starts from a place of nothing, and it opens up, then it goes along a little journey, and then it closes down again. It's a terrible graphic. This is the one that 3D gave us. We're going to design a whizzy new one for the Diocese of Sheffield that has the same effect, but it's supposed to be a lozenge. I've never seen a lozenge that looks quite like this. Before we look at exactly all the ingredients, I just want to stress again, do not make any of this weird. It's really, really important. I'm just going to say it over and over again. Do not make it weird. Okay, find out about all of the other stuff that's going on, because you are pastors and ministers, and so do not think that oversight ministry means that you become managers. Okay, if that's all you take away, then you're doing well. Okay, so you can go now if you wish, but be normal, be loving, be human, and remember that you're enabling people in their discipleship journey and whatever it is you're doing. So you're in community. So, you've spotted the moment. Transformational. This is where we're going. We're going to actually think about something. Now, you could tell them what to think. You could say, you need transformation. Well, the transformation you need is to get much better at doing this. Or you need to tell them to do this. Or have you seen the way that I do things? You could get straight in there with providing transformation in a teacher or a mentor mode. And sometimes that's appropriate. We've identified a need for transformation in terms of what's going on a Sunday morning, and basically what you're doing is wrong, you have to do it like this. Sometimes that might be what you have to do. But that's not what this session is about. We're going to try and find a transformation that is led by the person that you are helping in the conversation. So even though you're the one potentially in authority, the one who feels like they're leading the conversation, at this moment, you kind of hand over ownership of the conversation to someone else. The way that we do that is that we contract. So we're going to be following the clear lozenge idea. We contract. We work out what we're going to do. Now, contracting can take a long time. You could spend an hour working out what you're going to do, but that's fine. Or it could be straight away, you know exactly what you're going to do. But it is really helpful to be clear and that you co-create. I hate these terms. Anyone else feel like me? Co-create? Do you like co-create? Hands up, who likes co-create? Some like co-create. Who doesn't like co-create? So, but you get the point, is that you are working together, okay? So we're trying to get rid of power. There may be authority in your relationship, but at this point, you're trying to get rid of it in terms of how this conversation works. So it's not up for you as the questioner to be setting the agenda. You are trying to agree an agenda together, okay? And the conversation that you're having could be 5 minutes in length or all day. And you're creating the contract could take up the vast majority of that, or it could be really, really quick. How long do we need? It's often a really helpful question. How long do we need to be thinking about this? Right at the beginning, you could set a time, some kind of agreement about time. How long do we need? You need to be clear whether this is going to be helpful. If the answer to no, this isn't going to be helpful, or we're going to need 3 weeks to do this, or whatever, then it may be that you just bail out at that point. If you can't agree a contract, or it feels like it's not going to work, or it's not the right thing to do, just don't. Do something else. It's fine. But if you can, then the sorts of things that might come up, go on.
Can I ask a question? Could it be that there's a pre-question needed where you agree between you about whether or not a transformation has occurred and who's going to decide what the transformation is? You might be coming on to that, but if you're the one who's inviting the transformation conversation, that means you have an assumption that it's needed and the person may not realise it's needed. And it also proves to say that your idea of the transformation is correct. So do you discuss possible alternatives for the transformation as well?
So this will come up in the conversation, and it comes up in the contracting, is that actually it can't be set by the questioner as to what needs addressing and how it needs addressing, because that's mentoring or teaching, or that's another thing. You can do that, but that's not this. And it can bring transformation. So sometimes, if you've got authority, sometimes you have to say, this is the transformation that is needed, and this is the result that we need to be going towards, and I'm going to help you to get there. But actually, we see this in primary school education, that didactic model has use and value, but it has a limited use and value, and that people discovering and learning for themselves has a greater use and value. And so this is meant to be about helping people to discover and learn themselves. So you need to try to hold back from saying, this is what you need to be better at, or this is what the problem is, and I know what the solution is. Even if you know what the problem is and you know what the solution is. That's not what this conversation is going to be. And you may find as the questioner that you are then surprised.
So hence the importance of prayer, so it's going to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you normally meet, but with these sorts of conversations, couching it in prayer can be a really helpful thing. along the lines of that Father Stephen has just joined us in, Holy Spirit being present. So yeah. So the sorts of things that might come up, what are we doing today? How are we going to do it today? How will we know that we've done it today? Because it's really important that from the outset that we're clear about what it is that we're doing before we begin to do it. And so there could be 3 levels to how we work out what it is. Like it could be, what are we doing today in this conversation? But you could agree, what are we going to do over a series of conversations? Shall we agree to meet several times? Or it could be agreeing what it is that you're going to do in relation to a third party who's asked us to do it. There are external forces involved in our lives, like bishops and archdeacons and people like that may have an agenda that needs addressing, and so we just have to agree with each other how we're going to address that agenda. So it doesn't always fully come from us, but we need to be absolutely upfront about whose agenda it is and whether or not we're going to address it and how we're going to address it. So another way, the reason for the graphic on here, another way to look at this container shape is to think of the conversation as being like a plane journey. An eco-friendly version of a plane journey. It's a conversation facilitated by one person about another, but you have to agree where it is that you are going. Even if the agreement is you're not sure, you're quite happy to have a magical mystery tour, then that's fine, as long as you know that you're having a magical mystery tour. But if you think that you're flying to Prague, and then you open the cabin doors and realise that you're at Southampton or something, that's not going to be the journey that you agreed to go on, and it's not going to be satisfying for anyone. Anyone from Southampton? No? Good, I haven't offended anyone about the disappointment of arriving in Southampton. And it may be that as the questioner, you were used to flying to Southampton because you love that journey and you know it really well and you know the landscape in the area, and so you're assuming that that's where the other person wants to go. But if they think they're going to Prague, let them go to Prague. It's amazing. Even if you've never been there, help them get to Prague. So if you can reach this stage in your conversation where you're talking about destination, then you've already created some kind of container. You stopped your meeting becoming one that you can sometimes leave. I'm sure that you've had these meetings where you think, well, that was interesting. Or in fact, you've probably had ones where you've gone, actually, that wasn't interesting. That was really boring. And it wasn't really that useful for our shared purpose of growing a sustainable network of Christ-like, lively, diverse Christian communities in every place that are effective in making disciples and seeking to transform our society and God's world. But I did find out where to find amusing cat videos, or whatever it may be. So we want something more than just, our conversations to always just feel like a dumping ground or a place where we pick up something frivolous. We need to be growing in our mission, in our ministry, in our discipleship. Creating a container can help us to do it. So, this is the technique that we are going to look at. This is called stokers. Now, I have got a tandem at home that was made in 1936. Okay, this tandem weighs an absolute ton. It is beautiful though. Made in Belgium, it is beautiful. Anyway, got it on eBay. I want to go on repair shop with it, but I haven't got a backstory. I wonder whether anyone on repair shop actually has a genuine backstory. I wonder if they went for them. Anyway, anyone repair shop, you'll watch it? Yeah. Best thing on telly. The person on the back of a tandem, I used to use it in marriage prep, where I used to get the couples to get on the tandem and to feel the difference between steering and sitting at the back, and I'd get them both to do it, to just recognise the difference between the functions of being on the tandem and about how each needs the other in order to go there. But on a tandem, the person at the back is providing the power, but they're not steering, and they don't actually know where they're going. The person at the front is making all the choices and steering and kind of being in control. Now, when we're having one of these conversations, we're the one at the back. We're providing the power, and we're needed and necessary in order to make it happen. But we're not steering. We're not driving it. And it's a really important distinction to make, because if you ride a tandem with someone sat on the back who's not doing anything, it's really, really hard work. And in fact, if you ride a tandem and you're on the back and the person on the front isn't steering, it's also really, really scary. So, little known fact, in the cycling world, the person on the back of a tandem is called the stoker. That's what they do. You know, as if they're shoveling the coal into the steam engine or whatever, that they are the stoker. They're providing the power. So that's the role that we're going to try and take on, and that's why this is called Stokers, and it breaks down into these different headings, different things that you're going to do. So in a moment we're going to practice this, but I'm just going to summarise each of them for you, and then I'm going to give you my little summary on a sheet of paper as a little aid memoir that you can fold up and put in your phone case or whatever, or keep with you, because it could be a helpful little thing. But you just need to be clear to begin with what the subject is you're talking about. And the sorts of questions that you might ask, a bit obvious. What are we talking about? Just be clear. What are we talking about? What's your question today? Which bit of all of that stuff that we did in the non-weird part of the conversation, which bit would be useful for you to explore today? Which bit do you want to look at? Which bit's important? And you might want to talk a bit about time. So in the 45 minutes that we've got, what would you like to talk about? Time being the second one. Given that we've got until 11 o'clock, we've already agreed we've got until 11 o'clock, which bit should we focus on? So, if you can talk about time positively as being, we've got until then, rather than we've only got 30 seconds left, or whatever, or can we manage to fit all that in? If you just say, what would you like to do in the time available to us? Just give it just a positive spin. The gift is 45 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. What would you like to do? So work out what the subject is in the time that you've got available. And then just explore what the outcome might be that might be helpful. What would you like to be different by the end of this conversation? What are you hoping to gain from this? What sort of solution are you looking for? What's a good outcome for you? What's a good outcome for your team, for the Diocese of Sheffield, for your parishioners, for your congregation, for the world? You can go as far as you want in terms of what the good outcome would be and for who, depending on the subject matter that has come up. And then, how will we know that we've got that? How are you going to know when this conversation is coming into land? When you look out the window, oh, I recognise that's Prague. Look at that little thing going like that on the hill or whatever it may be. How will you know that you're getting close? And sometimes people will answer how they'll know. And they'll say, by the end I'll have an action plan with 2 or 3 steps and I will have written them down. By the end I'll have a solution and I'll know exactly what to do. By the end, Mr. Miggins will have left and gone to another church, or whatever it may be. But sometimes people are going to struggle to really know. They might just say, well, I don't know now how I'm going to know, but I know I'll know at the time when it feels like it's good enough. And as long as they are satisfied with how they will know, you as a questioner don't need to fully understand their thought processes, get inside their mind. So, I'll just know is okay at that point. But you would need to be asking at some point when we move on, you would need to be saying, do you know yet? If they haven't made it clear what the knowing looks like, you may have to just keep checking in, even if you still don't understand what on earth they're talking about. And then being clear about your role. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? Because people always defer to perceived power. So if you're an oversight minister talking to a focal minister, they're going to think that you are policing the responses. If you're an oversight minister being talked to by an associate archdeacon who you perceive to have authority, did you know we have none? We have a general preacher's license, yeah, just be aware of power. How are we going to do it, and who's going to do it? How are we going to share this process? And if you say, how do you want to go about this? How do you want to go about exploring your issue, or the thing that you want to learn, or the problem that you want to solve, or whatever it may be? How are we going to go at it? If they draw a blank, you can just move on and ask a few more questions, and you might end up saying, is this useful? Should we try something different? And there are all sorts of other ways. When we get onto the exploring, there are all sorts of other ways you can do it. But if you ask it right up front, how are we going to go about this? It doesn't matter if you change your mind. You can change your contract anytime you like, but just have one in place. But if you don't ask and just assume, then you're leading the conversation. You're trying to be at the front of the tandem when actually you should be at the back. And then finally, the final S is where are we going to start? Remember that you don't need the whole story in order for it to be helpful for the person. So you don't have to be saying, can you just remind me again who Mr. Miggins is, and what the problem was, and how long they've been in church, and who was it they first fell out with? And you don't need all of that stuff. If they just want to talk about what they know, they don't need to tell you the story. Where shall we start? And it's not where you want to start, it's where they want to start. So, we are going to have some fun now. I'm going to hand these out because we're going to do an exercise. I will put up here. I'm going to ask you to get into threes. But in order to do this, you just need a moment while I'm handing them out, so I'm not going to rush to hand them out, because you need a moment to think of something that you're happy to have a conversation about that's maybe going on. It could be in your professional life, it could be in your personal life, but just something that you would be prepared to have a conversation about that's not going to feel too challenging, and something that if you were having a coaching conversation, if you had a conversation booked in with someone, that this might be something that would be helpful for you to think about. So if you could just be thinking of something and that you don't mind sharing in this context, we'll have a kind of Chatham House rule in that, don't say who said things here, but if something really juicy comes up, then you can maybe mention what the juicy thing is, but not where it came from. Don't make it obvious. That's the way I understand Chatham House. I love it. Anyway, so you need to think of something, and then you're going to take it in turns where you're going to help someone to start this process of thinking about it. So it's not the thinker who is the one that's actually receiving the learning here. You are going to practice creating a contract, which is why I'm going to hand out little bits of paper that say it on there. And so you're going to kind of pretend you've got an hour to do this. So, how long have we got? Oh, we've got an hour. So, because you're not actually going to do any coaching, you're just doing the very first bit of creating a container. And then what will happen is it will get interrupted by the fire alarm, the person who's keeping time, and then it stops. So you're not going to actually get anywhere. It's just about whether or not you can get that plane on the runway and up in the air. You're not worried really where the destination is. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of an artificial exercise because you're not going to have to land a plane, you're just going to stop. And the idea is to practice to see whether or not, without it being weird, you can create a contract with someone, that you can do this Stoker's contracting. So you need to get into threes, 3 people that you're comfortable with, to explore something. You don't have to know them already, but you just have to not be scared of them. And then the 3 roles are, one person will be the thinker, exploring their problem. One person will be the questioner, who will be doing the Stoker's thing, and the other person will keep time and just do 5 minutes each. Take it in turns. And then have a little chat afterwards about how it felt. 5 minutes maximum. If you get to the end of Stoker's in 30 seconds, then you're absolutely amazing. Might not have done it properly, but just move on and do the next one, and see what the other people in your group do. So I'll hand these out. by my sons, not great at maths, but by my maths, you had more than 5 minutes each. So, which means that you were really enjoying this. That's my understanding. Am I right or am I wrong?
You're wrong.
Okay, so I'll start with a question. How was that? How did that feel as an exercise? Anyone want to throw anything out?
You have to be very careful not to move into the coaching.
Yeah.
That was when that's what really your blood to do that.
Yeah.
You have to think, no, that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
And you have to resist that.
No, you've done more training, haven't you, Andrew?
Yeah.
Is that right? So you knew where this could go.
Yeah.
So you know where this training is going to go. So that might be why. For anyone who hasn't done the training, did you feel like you felt like you were springboarding into something else that you hadn't prepared for?
Yeah.
Did anyone find it useful? Anyone find it weird?
I think we found that because the role question got a bit weird
Yeah.
at times. And I must admit, we ended up shuffling around the order slightly, just depending what felt natural. We didn't necessarily do it in stoke order.
So that is really, really important that you hear. Did you all hear what that comment was? We shuffled round the role because it felt more natural. Right? Do not stick to something and have a weird conversation. Have a natural conversation. So that is brilliant that you'd already worked out that if the next question that comes up isn't the next one on the list, then just go with what comes up. This is just a guide. It's just some ideas. If you find that during your contracting, you've done them in another order, if you had that little aid memoir with you, you might think, there's one more thing I need to ask about that didn't come up at the time, so I'll come back to it. That kind of thing. But be natural. Really important. So, top of the class so far. Anyone got anything better than we shifted them around because it was natural? Because otherwise, this is going to be gold star awarded down here.
I don't know if it's any better, but never mind. I find it really hard to focus. So actually having that shape is it may not be the shape I actually end up using, but having a shape to start with was quite useful.
Yeah. So just the very idea of containing a conversation so you know what it is you're talking about and having some guidance into how to do that, you've already found helpful, just that idea of shape. For people who are a bit, a squirrel. Kind of
Well,
thing.
some of us
Which
were
you
very a squirrel.
Yes, you are. Anyone else got any reflections or observations, conscious that the very next thing that's going to happen is this?
Oh, sound. Oh, squirrel!
The answer's probably Jesus.
You know, on the picture, it's the person speaking to Bishop, because when I'm in conversation, I never get that kind of. That's not my experience.
I think that someone just broke wind. But I deliberately chose a picture where people were having a conversation during the break, and actually Toby made a really good point, is that part of what we're doing here is just networking and enjoying time with each other. So keep talking about this stuff or about anything else you want to talk about, but go and have a break. So, as is appropriate for a session on listening, everyone's talking. So we're going to just spend this next session thinking about listening, and particularly the difference between hearing and noticing, because listening is where we manage to bridge that gap between the sounds and words that we hear and what we actually notice and what becomes relevant and important. So to start off with, before you get any input, we're going to do a little exercise. Chris is going to hand these out. Now you need to get into pairs, and you need to decide in your pair who is person 1 and who is person 2. Okay? So you're in a pair and you're either person 1 or person 2. And when you've worked out who is person 1 and person 2, please don't look at the list that the other person has got, because you're going to be trying to work it out. They're on the other side of the bits of paper. You're going to be trying to work out what's on their list, and they're going to be trying to work out what's on your list. So just work out on the headings, are you person 1 or person 2, and then stick to it, because we're going to keep revisiting being person 1 or person 2. Okay, we're going to come back together now. So it's a fun exercise, I can tell from the laughter in the room. But there is a serious point. How does it feel telling a story in those circumstances? How?
Annoying. He was frustrated.
He was probably thinking you were being really annoying there.
Did anyone manage to tell their story effectively and feel like they'd managed to tell a story that had some kind of, cohesion?
No, you don't, because you know the person's not listening, and so the story that you're telling, you're missing chunks out, which are probably key details.
Right.
Because all you're doing is bullet pointing, because you know, and all that detail in between, which is probably the interesting bit.
Yeah.
What really needs to talk about is not discussed, because you know they're not listening, so there's the bullet points, never mind the detail. Yeah. What you're
So, but that's really important, that if you know you're not being heard, you don't tell such a good story. So, regardless of the hearer not having got the gist of it, you haven't managed to tell it.
I think it was brilliant, sneaky this. In terms of, he just got his iPad out and started watching famous Americans scoring goals on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just can't penetrate that.
You can't compete.
And I sort of kind of lost on the side at the time. But he picked up one of these players called Christian Pulisic, who scored an amazing goal once. And he used to play for Chelsea. And then suddenly, I was able to start talking about Christian Pulisic playing for Chelsea. And I was able to start dropping in things from person 1. Brilliantly by going, oh yeah, and he used to play for Chelsea, and he used to train near I lived, and he had this big silly car that happened to get nicked, and that's obviously a porky pie, but it's not very into. And I could say how my nephews would come over and we'd go down each high street and see Christian Pulisic play.
Yeah.
Do you not have nephews?
No.
Made up nephews.
Destroyed this relationship value, but at least
Broken down.
So I was just able to get a couple of things in before just meeting halfway, actually.
Okay. So the storytelling is really hard, but you might get an in. If you are skilled at storytelling, you might be able to use the distraction itself as a way to get in there sometimes. So that's how you can break through it if you're not being listened
I tell stories every week to people that don't listen. I call it church or Sunday morning. So I get my own back in the sermon.
to. Yeah.
But actually, there's an element of truth in what I've just said, and that is I don't actually get my own back in the sermon, because what I've noticed is when I'm preaching, stories are often constructed, not made up. But you think about how you're going to tell it,
Yeah.
and the wording, like a comedian.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily funny.
Yeah.
And the sermon allows you, preaching allows you that license in a way that if you were in a group with 2 or 3 people, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Everybody would literally just ignore me, interrupt me, walk off. That's what people do.
Yeah.
But in the sermon, it goes silent. People are listening because they like stories.
Yeah.
And that dynamic's really interesting.
Yeah.
About what doesn't work on the one-to-one level.
Yeah.
But would work on the...
Although the church I was vicar of in Coventry, I used to get heckled and people would get up and walk out if they thought I was talking rubbish, or they would join in, or like it was quite free and easy. shall we say.
Did that help?
Obviously, no one actually walked out ever,
No.
or threw fruit, or any of that kind of stuff.
Did that help, or?
So, I mean, so when I realised they were people who actively participated and they saw it as being more conversational than didactic, I just had to embrace it. And so my preaching style became more conversational than didactic. But normally it is didactic. We do get that space. But even when you're preaching, you know whether you're preaching to a brick wall or whether, because we can tell whether people are listening, whether they're hearing what we're saying. They might be quiet, but they might be watching Christian Pulisic score goals for America. You know, and you can't see what's behind the
There's
pin.
a fidgeting factor, isn't there, when you're preaching? You can see whether you can hear a pin drop,
Yeah.
or whether the eyes are wandering.
Yeah.
But one-to-one, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
where I am.
It's a very good point. Amanda?
I think most of us have the experience of being preaching to a congregation, and you find the people who are active listeners, who are nodding, who are the ones who are encouraging you to keep going by the way that they are actively listening.
So they help you tell your story better because you find them. Yeah. And the people who aren't listening or whose heads are down or are fidgeting, if you don't look at them, you're less likely to be distracted as the storyteller.
This may not be so much in a one-to-one situation, but nowadays, one of the things we've learned is a lot of people actively listen by doodling, by Googling on the phone things that you're saying and exploring things, by fiddling, by fishing. So they appear to be actively, completely disengaged. But actually, if you have a conversation with them later, they've engaged in quite a deep way. And I think there is a bit of a change in culture and about understanding the different styles. Now, it probably isn't the same on one-to-one, I think.
So we'll come back to it in a little bit later in this session, but there is a difference between passive listening and active listening. And I would suggest that the person who is aiding their listening experience by engaging with something else, that's what's called passive listening, because they're not encouraging the storyteller. That's what active listening is where you help the storyteller tell their story.
So I was aware that I was doing things I normally do, trying to think, what can I do to be not listening? And I was hearing every single word, which means what my recall would be doesn't matter entirely, but I heard every single word. Whether she felt listened to doesn't matter entirely. So I was trying not to listen and failing, which is a really strange experience.
You've beautifully brought me on to my next question, which was, we've heard how hard it was to tell the story. Did any of you who was doing the distracting and actively trying to look like you're not listening, did any of you feel like you actually understood what you were being told? Did anyone hear the story? Do you think you could repeat back the 5 bullet points? Do you think you can have a good stab at what the 5 bullet points were that the other person had? So you could.
I could now, in an hour's time, probably not.
I was making myself not listen,
Right.
because that was the way I could be sure that I was conveying that I was not listening.
Yeah.
And so I was aware that Richard was bringing in more and more catastrophe into the story to try and force me. Somebody died!
Did anyone use the technique when you were listening? If someone said, somebody died, and you go, I knew somebody who died, and then start telling your own story. Because that's a really common one. You know, I knew somebody who played for Chelsea, but I actually support Wednesday, and they're a much better team, and then all you do is, do you know what I mean? And you could do that, and they never get to talk about Christian Pulisic, which wouldn't be a bad thing. But, sorry, not part of them. Chelsea's fine. Not. Listening, you know, hopefully that exercise just makes it clear that listening is a skill, it's an art, and it's something that we can engage with. So, simple aspects of listening are what we actually hear people saying, what we notice about people, and what we sense about people. And often we think that listening is just with our ears. Now, if we are doing the kind of listening that Fiona was talking about, where in order to aid our experience of listening, we use a distraction so that we can concentrate better, we might miss one of these elements because our eyes might not be there or we might not be picking up. So just to be aware that there are different aspects of listening than just the words that we hear. And so, it's one of the things that we see with the younger generation is that they spend so much of their time on the phone that they hear the words, but they don't necessarily notice the other aspects of a conversation that they're participating in if they're distracted by their phone. It's why, so churches that use screens versus churches that use notice sheets. For me, it's a real bugbear at communion. Now, I don't have a particularly high Eucharistic theology, but I think, look at the blooming front during communion. Look at what's happening. That's why we have this great big table, as I would call it. You may have another name for it, and it's why we have this drama being enacted. I'm not just reading some words, so get your eyes off the blooming notice sheet, off the service book. So it's a good example where, the listening, our most profound and sacramental moments, that often even in church we don't enable people to listen properly because we've put loads of bright in, and so they're just looking down and they're not fully engaged. I just throw that out to you. Okay, so we're going to do another exercise. We're going to take this listening. You're going to be in the same pairs. You're the same person. We're doing exercise 2. But you will notice at the top of your little list that there is something called a headline and something called an underbelly. And so those are not things that you name or mention. A headline is the general theme of what it is that you want to talk about. So sometimes people might be talking about a particular event that happened, but actually there is a theme that is important to them. And so I've tried to suggest an overall theme. And the underbelly is how you might actually feel about that thing. Okay, so as you construct your story using the bottom 8 things, you want to do it in such a way that it feels like the underbelly and communicates something about the headline. Because when we're listening, it can be really helpful to try and go beyond the words and to pick out how people feel. So if somebody says, someone died, we can assume that they are talking about a sad event or something. But if they said, and then someone died, it's like, we need to have heard that. The tone of voice, the emotion, all of that kind of stuff. So you're going to do another exercise where you're going to construct a longer story, and this time the listener is going to really, really try and listen. They're going to try and get the points from the story. They're also going to try and get the theme of the story. They're going to try and get the emotion of the story, but you're going to sit back to back when you do it. So you cannot see each other. So you're the same people, but you are going to sit back to back so that you cannot see each other. One of you will tell a story, and the other one will try and hear the story, and the theme, and the emotion of it. And then they're going to recount it. Still back to back, they're going to say, this is the story that I just heard you tell. And when they tell the story back to you as the original storyteller, just tick off how many of the things they got. Maybe write down any other observations, things they came out with that are wrong. Does that make sense? For those who were telling a story, how did it feel telling a story to someone who was behind you? Weird.
Yeah.
Weird? Difficult to tell the story, okay? Would you agree? Was it harder or easier than when they were on the phone and watching videos and interrupting?
Well, no, I think my initial reaction was that it's actually easier than being on Zoom.
Easier than Zoom? Ooh, controversial. So even when someone's behind you, they feel more present than when they're on a screen. Take note. Yeah. Okay. So and then go on.
I felt like a spy.
Yeah.
Like a secret.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So you won't believe this, but I am actually quite shy.
No, I don't know.
And I actually sometimes find it a bit embarrassing to talk to people face to face. So in some ways, that was more comfortable because I didn't have to look them in the face.
Okay. So there's lots of research done about the difference between face-to-face and side-to-side conversation. And so for introverts, side-to-side is often much more helpful than face-to-face, which extroverts prefer. And there's a different sort of intimacy that's created. It's often the case with blokes as well. I'm not hugely into gender discrimination and stuff, but men tend to be more comfortable with a side-to-side. So going for a walk or doing a task or something, then they'll talk about how they feel. But if you ask them to their face how they feel, they don't understand the question. So it's just, I don't know that back-to-back is included in that research. It tends to be face-to-face and side-to-side. There's research to be done, anyone wanting to do anything. And then for those who were listening, how did it feel listening to someone behind you?
Hard work.
Really hard work. Yeah? So, this is the crunch point. Scores on the doors. Who got 10 out of 10? Who was able to listen and name the 10 points that they've been told, including the theme and the underbelly? 10 out of 10?
I think so.
Yeah? Yeah? Anyone else get 10 out of 10? Okay, any 9s? 8s? 7s? 6s? Has anyone not put their hand up yet?
We didn't get the 10 out of 10 bits from the explanation. We didn't read your
Oh, okay. That's all right.
We understand what we should have done now.
Yeah, okay. Because we're going to do a similar exercise, but things that it's really, I hope that this will bring into focus is that listening and in fact storytelling, there's a whole load of other stuff that is involved, like the posture, the eye contact. Do you know about mirroring? That if someone wants to feel listened to, if you mirror their body language, they're more likely to feel that you're listening to them. But if their body language is anxious or stressed, you can actually, what you do is if you mirror them, you can then shift to a more relaxed or easier way to have the conversation. And subconsciously, they will mirror you. And so if they start their conversation with their arms crossed, leaning into you like this, then as you're listening to them, cross your arms and listen to them. And then, and they'll do the same, and they'll be less stressed. It's brilliant. Mirroring is brilliant in terms of facilitating someone telling a story and perhaps being able to engage with the emotions that are there. Non-verbal prompts. How hard is it to give non-verbal prompts? You know what I mean by that? You know, the I see what you're saying. Or some of them are a bit verbal, but or the nods, the stuff that we appreciate when we're preaching. How hard is it to do when there's behind your back? It's really hard. So position matters when you are listening, and you can enable someone to tell a better story by thinking about where you position yourself and how, if you're right up in their grill, facing directly into them, it can feel quite challenging. But if you sit at 3/4 to them or something, slightly off centre, so that you can make easy eye contact, but if they're an introvert, so that they can also look away and not feel like they're being oppressed by your presence. Make sure you're at the same eye level as them, so don't stand over people. All of this kind of stuff, it's really basic stuff. If you go and see someone and they give you a tiny little chair while they're sat behind their desk, they're communicating something, and you know that the way that you listen is going to be challenging if you're trying to listen and they're talking like this to you. But there's something else going on. So should we maybe change our position in some way? Could we meet somewhere else next time? How about we meet in a cafe or go for a walk or whatever it may be? So these things are really important, and trying to work out actually how people feel and what the themes are is better sometimes than just repeating back the words. Repeating back some of these stupid things in the story. You do your hobby 3 times a week or something. It could be actually the fact that you're really proud of something is the bit that you're trying to communicate. And all of the story was just trying to communicate that one thing. And so sometimes you've got to try as to whether or not that's the thing that you're communicating. So you hear a story that's all about this new skill in a competition and it's snowing in Glasgow or whatever, all that kind of stuff. But actually, you think that what they're talking about is being proud of something. You could just say, oh, is that something you're proud of? Because if that's what you think you've heard. And they might go, no, I'm just telling you because, and they'll clarify. Hopefully they won't be offended if you just put it as a question. But is that what is this about pride? Or, is this about how much you enjoy other people's success? Because it shows that you're really listening and going deeper if you can do even more than just repeat the words back. But to be honest with you, repeating the words back can be really helpful to know that you've been heard. I heard you saying that it was in Glasgow, is that right? And you don't have to go in and ask more details. You don't have to tell them that you've been to Glasgow or never been to Glasgow, or what's your favourite thing about Glasgow. Let them tell their story, don't lead them. But you could repeat back, you're telling me something about going to Glasgow, that's amazing. So, listening skills are things that we can develop to enable other people. And, I think the example of the person in the pew who helps us get through our sermon, who we know those are the people that we want to look at, they are using listening skills in order to do it, even if they don't know it, because you're feeling encouraged by it. So if you want a purposeful conversation, develop those skills. And if you ever get to sit in one of the pews, I don't know how often that happens for you, make sure you encourage the person who's preaching. Try and be the person who you would love to have sitting where you're sitting when you're doing it, because it is really valuable if you can just offer the nods and the smiles and all of that kind of stuff. So, we're going to do that exercise one more time before break time, but this time, get yourself into a proper, comfortable position, look at each other, try and help the other person to tell the story, and then see whether it's easier for them to tell it or whether it's easier for you to be able to retell it back to them. So just quickly go through this. Exercise 3, you should each have another list of things. You're the same person, 1 or 2, without looking at the other person's list. But get yourself in a comfortable position where you are going to do everything you can to hear what this person is saying. Make sure they're comfortable, you can see them, you can detect how they're feeling, see what they're doing with their hands, all of that kind of stuff. And 1 in terms of how easy it was to get the gist of what you were being told and how easy it was to be able to tell the story and to tell it well. Anyone got any feedback to offer?
I find it very difficult to tell a story about one thing while telling an underbelly about another.
Yeah.
And clearly, in real life, it will be possible for people to see when I'm doing that.
Yeah.
Usually that is done more unconsciously or subconsciously than trying to do it in a contrived way.
So it may be that in the exercise, it might be better to say, portray an emotion and just let you choose. Because it is, just say portray an emotion. As you're doing this, give an emotion. So that could be down to, I've not really created a brilliant exercise because it is hard to pretend to be enthusiastic about something, or whatever it may be. So I do take your point. But did the person get what you were trying to do? Were they able to pick it up?
To be honest, I didn't really achieve it. I think either time in presenting the headline.
Yeah.
I found it easy to present the underbelly.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. Any other feedback on that one? How it felt doing exercise 3, looking at each other, nodding, encouraging, grunting and groaning, or whatever it was that you were doing?
Probably what you said, it allowed you to tell the storyteller, it allowed you to tell the story much more animated because you were getting feedback from the listener.
Yeah.
By their posture, by their smile, by those non-verbal things. So it made the story that you were telling more interesting, fuller. Whereas when we had our facts, it wasn't animated.
Yeah. So that is absolute gold dust, what you have said that, because this whole thing about purposeful conversations is that the point is not that we get to understand what we're being told. The point is the person is able to process it and tell it and work through it. It's useful for the teller, the person speaking. And you've just said that having someone listen, actively listen and encourage you, made it easier for you to tell the story. And so we can offer that to the people who we are supervising, overseeing, managing, supporting, encouraging, equipping, whatever we're doing with them. We can use that. We can make it easier for them to be able to engage with what it is that's going on for them. So thank you, that's really helpful. Any other feedback about that third exercise as compared to the others? Did anyone think it was no different? Just annoying exercises?
I just find the contrast between 2 and 3 is as great as the contrast between 1 and 2.
Brilliant. So again, that's really important that bad listening, or imperfect listening and good listening are closer together than actively not listening. So they should, I'm glad that you spotted that actually you pick a lot up with your ears, and they do tell a story, but it's not as good as the story that they tell, and your listening isn't as good at picking things up, but you still pick a lot up. So if that's all that you can do is listen in one modality, then that's great, do it. But if you could use more, it will be better.
Can I just ask, do you know the one thing I find really tricky, and it's been the same here today, is zoning out on other conversations. So to get some tips on how to try and zone in on that and not be distracted.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful, because that is hard, isn't it?
It is really hard. So one of the things I could have put on the little list of helpful things. Where were we? This is about environment. Where are you having this conversation? Yeah. So if you can control the environment, then do so that it's easier for you to be able to listen. But otherwise, you've just got to work at it. So things like making sure that you're really looking at the person. You're more likely to listen to someone if you can see their mouth moving and you're looking at their face. And you're less likely to hear the person sharing the juicy bit of gossip over in the corner. But it's still difficult, and if you are someone who isn't easily distracted, if you're like Jackie, or a squirrel kind of thing, then if a squirrel comes into view, then you're going to notice a squirrel, and so you just need to know that about yourself. So if you are someone who's distracted, did you hear me say that?
I did. I rely quite a lot on lip reading, not because of a hearing issue, but in this context, if I'm going to focus, then I need to be able to see what they're saying, because that helps me to focus.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like having the subtitles on a programme. Stephen hates it. Actually, for me, it's quite useful.
Yeah.
Because there's something that my brain will still have seen the shape of the word they've said, even if my ears haven't quite got it yet.
So that's really
visual is important for me.
Do you remember all the face masks that we were wearing not that long ago?
Yes. It's really helpful.
Probably if you'd mentioned in this, but there was once a bishop's lecture down in the cathedral. It wasn't our bishop. And a visiting bishop came, and I sat behind a pillar. I like to do that so that nobody can see me. And I found it absolutely patronising and irritating. And when I went home, I looked at it online so I could see his face, and it really changed it.
Wow.
And I remember, and it really struck me that the tone looked completely different once I could see it. It improved.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And I thought, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't see him, I really didn't like it.
Yeah.
It really changed it.
So engaging with people's faces, that human contact with faces, is really valuable. Any cyclists here? Anyone ride a bike a lot? So I was taught by someone, an experienced cyclist in London, just make eye contact with people, turn your face to people when you're approaching junctions, and they will engage with you as a person and not as an irritation. And so going on to a roundabout, look at people, like turn your face and people notice. Babies, from the very moment they're born, gravitate towards faces. We still do it. We still do it as adults. We gravitate towards faces. So it's really good that the communication without face is so hard. to properly understand.
Amanda said something about, when you're talking to people, say after the service on Sunday morning, and you're talking to somebody, in the background you can see somebody else's face.
Trying to get in there,
And that makes it very difficult to hear what the person is saying to you, because, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember at my sending church, we, between us, and said it on Sunday morning to the whole congregation, because we chose a Sunday that we knew there was no visitors, and we said after the service, if we're talking to somebody who's a newcomer, please don't hover in the background. Just go. You can talk to us anytime, but we need to focus on this person, and they need our attention, and vice versa. And that was opposite, and people got it.
And if you're not a newcomer, don't hog the minister and have an important conversation at that moment. It's just not the time and place. And another thing I was taught, I think this came from the Bob Jackson course, Everybody Welcome. Open circles, you know about open circles? So whenever you're talking to someone, you don't do face to face, there's always a gap so that someone can join the conversation. You just invite people in to the conversation that you're having, and just always keep opening the circle, because the number of friendly, welcoming churches I've been to where all I see are the backs of people's heads talking to people that they already know, and we see it loads, and it's normal that they want to talk to each other, but if they could just think about what do other people see, so that you don't have to hover behind. If you want to have a conversation with someone who's already having one, you join in the one they're already having, and then it will gradually steer around. So open circles is another good answer to that. Okay, anything more on that listening bit, or should we get on with this? Not that. The next bit. Where were we? Conversation journey, getting where you need to go. So, this is the stuff that can feel quite awkward if you're not used to it, about how you're going to get people to where they're going to go. Because it may be that they've come up with an issue, you've worked out how much time you've got, they've said where it is that they want to go, you're listening really hard, but you don't really understand, you don't have any answers, or maybe you think you do have some answers, but you're trying to get them to where they want to go. And so you may have to rein yourself in. If you've got experience of the thing that's happening, this may be the time when you deliberately, actively do not share your experience, where your natural inclination may be always to share your experience in those moments. And so you just need to be revisited in your head about the purpose of the conversation, and your focus being the person in front of you, not you or your view of how church could be, should be, would be if everyone did it your way or whatever, that kind of thing. You've just got to be focusing on the person who is in front of you and helping them to find a new insight or a solution or whatever it may be, rather than telling them what to do. Now, I'm saying all this, but you will have those complicated relationships that I talked about. And it may be that you do find sometimes that you slip in and out of a coaching model. Okay, so you may come to this point where actually you could seek consent to say, would it be helpful if I shared some of my insights or experience? But be ready for the answer to be, no. I want to think about where I'm going. I don't want to hear where you've been. Okay, and you need to try and create permission for that to happen at that point. And it may take a while to get there if that's not the dynamic that you normally have. And so you are trying to encourage and equip the person in front of you. And so this is where we start exploring things, and it's where they are doing their exploration. So this is their hand holding their compass, walking on their mountain and trying to get to their destination. This is not you. So you don't need to understand. You don't need the backstory. You don't need to make comparisons. You don't need to offer an emotional response. You have to try and hide your sharp intake of breath as you hear what they're actually doing or thinking of doing, all of that kind of stuff. You need to try and sit on some of your responses to help them to explore. And so if you find yourself going, "You are? Oh dear. Were you sure?" Or "Help me, Lord, what have I just heard?" Or "Does the bishop know?" Or any of that kind of stuff, then it may be that what you're doing is solving or saving rather than encouraging and equipping. Now, if it is something really important, it might be that solving or saving is appropriate. But you need to be aware that that's what you've then chosen to do. You've taken yourself out of what you agreed to be doing in order to solve and save rather than to encourage and equip. So you could, if you find yourself going, "Oh, really? Oh no, is that really what's going on? Is that what you're thinking?" It could be. Well, so in the time that we have, what's the most important question that we need to explore now? Turn it back into a question that will help them to rethink. I wonder, might it help if we, if we thought about it in a different way? Might it help if we swapped seats? Might it help if you wrote something down? Might it help if we went for a walk? There are all sorts of things that you could suggest in order to help them to explore. When we were doing this training, we did all sorts of wonderful exercises with objects, trying to create different images of what a situation was, where we had objects and pictures and changing. We changed seats and changed roles and all of that. You can play with different models of communication that allow them to explore. I don't need to give you all of those. You can find them in any coaching book, actually, all of that kind of stuff. But the idea about helping them to explore. Can you tell me more about it? Would it help if you were to draw it? Would it help to view it from a different perspective? That's a really powerful one, actually, sometimes, is to say to people, they've described a situation. Bob has been doing this, and Steve has been doing this, and Mary's been doing that. And if you say, well, would it be helpful to look at this from Mary's perspective? What do you think that might be? Put yourself in their shoes. It's often said that, if you really want to experience the world, then walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Because by the time they realise you've stolen their shoes, you're a mile away.
And they have no shoes.
And they have no shoes to chase you. Very, very helpful. But it might be at this point that you seek consent to offer something back. So this might be where you offer back some of the underbelly or the themes that you think you've heard. Can I share something? Would it be helpful to hear my perspective? But offer it. Don't just do it. And so during this phase, it's really important that you try to pay attention again to power, that you kind of keep power in mind as to who's got the power in this conversation, particularly if there is an authority structure that would suggest you're the one with the power. Because at this point of the exploration, you want to be doing everything you can to be giving the power to the other person, so that they can really explore it. And you need to keep checking in. Because your contract, remember our contracting with Stokers, it may have long expired. We said we were going to talk about this, and this is our destination, and this is where we were going. And it could be by the time you get to the exploration phase, they're on a different mountain, or they're headed towards a different airport, which is why you need to check it in. Are we still going to the same place? Is this where we want to be going, or do we want to go back and head back to where we said we were at the beginning? So it could be really helpful to just check in terms of those destinations when you're doing the exploring. Because conversations go in many directions, you're going to keep coming up to different crossroads and have a choice about which way you're going to go. It's not wrong to divert, but check that it's okay. Because it shouldn't be your choice. These are real people who you're in real relationship with, and if what comes up is that actually this other thing is more important, or this perspective is more important, go with it. That's part of what you're doing, is enabling them to work on it. And it may be that, the big insight is, I don't want to get to there, I want to do this instead. And in the 5 minutes left, we're going to make another date and talk about this another time, whatever it may be. So keeping on checking in is really, really important to enable exploration. So a little bit like the nodding and the and the smiling that you did when you were listening, is that you need to be a little bit more directive. Is this useful? So where are we? What insights have you had so far? So it's just taking that kind of, those non-verbal cues, turning them into slightly more directive questions so that it actively helps someone to explore. We've now got 3 minutes left. What do we need to do between now and the end of this conversation that would be really useful for you? So this phase can take as long as you like, because in some ways this is where the new insights may come, really trying to get more perspective. It could take as long as you like, or it could be really quick. I've stated it. There's no more exploring to do. I just want to get into working out what to do. I know all about the situation. But don't end here. So keep an eye on the time when you're exploring, because don't have someone stuck out at the top of a mountain with only a compass, nowhere near where they wanted to go, and nowhere near where they departed from. So don't run out of time on the top of the mountain. You need to keep an eye on it so that you can get onto the final bits. C-L-E-A-R, we're only on E. We're still right in the middle, okay? So try not to finish here, because it just feels really dissatisfying for the person who you're trying to encourage and equip if they started exploring something and nothing came of it. Because then it gets forgotten, and it's their conversation anyway, so it's not up to you to be reminding them, and it was their thing that they said was important, but nothing came of it. So try not to stop here, keep an eye on the time, which is why you then come on to the A of action, which can, again, sometimes be really brief. And if you're used to mentoring, action is often the thing that we jump to really quickly. Someone comes to you and they say, this is a situation, they give a brief description of the situation, and then you go straight and say, right, 3 things that we're going to do about it, let's help you. You could do this, you could do this, you could do that, which one do you want to do? And mentoring will often jump into suggesting action plans and getting people to do it. So here we've taken our time to get there, but the question is, what do you want to do about this? What could you do about this? What action could you take? Is there one thing that you could change about this? Given that you've given us a whole big situation and there's no way that you're going to get Mr. Miggins to leave the church, what could you do? Could you think of anything smaller to do? So I used to be a nurse, and we used to do this thing called solution-focused therapy. And solution-focused therapy is all about working out what you can do. You don't look at the problems, the barriers. They have these lovely phrases like, imagine you're on Solution Island. Don't think about how you got there. What does Solution Island look like? But they would talk about this thing called pigeon steps. And it's like, if you want to, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step or whatever. No. Journey of 1,000 miles starts with the tiniest incremental movement, because you're going to achieve it. And so if you imagine walking like this, then you may not get very far, but you've got somewhere. So when it comes to the action phase, if someone is struggling to come up with an action, ask them to think of a smaller one. And they may find something that they can achieve. So action should be easy, and then, do you know about the 5 W's? Where, when, who, why, and how, or what? Yeah, and what. So 5 W's and an H. So you could, but you could be, in terms of action, who's going to do it, where are they going to do it? You've probably already done the why because they've told the story, so you might have the how are they going to do it, and when. So, try and get a little bit more detail sort of nailed down, And how are you going to know whether or not you've done it? And so it might be at this stage that you say, would it be helpful to write some of this down? Do you want to borrow my pen, write yourself an action plan, and you can sit back and just help them to put a plan together, that kind of thing. So action can be really helpful. And then you get into the review phase, and the review part of the conversation is basically you just revisit the beginning. We said we were going to do this. How have we done? Are we on track? Is this useful? What do you know now that you didn't know at the beginning? Have you gained any new insights here? We agreed that we would fly to Prague. Have you got to where you need to be? I know that we're not in Prague, we're in Bucharest, but still a nice place. Is that okay, having got that? And if not, how are we going to get to Prague? And when should we do it again? So just keeping on reviewing the progress and where people were getting to. And so the other thing that we often don't like doing, I've mentioned it a few times, talking about time, it can feel rude. What you don't want to be doing is constantly looking at if you don't wear a wristwatch and you're using your phone, then it looks like you're just checking the football scores or something. Or if you keep getting your phone out to look at the time, or even if you look at the wristwatch, people can take that as I'm not really listening. So similar to our first exercise, how many of you did the looking at your phone or looking at your watch during it? So it is a way of communicating that we don't want to listen to someone. So time is an issue that, as the person leading this conversation, you need to work out a way to bring time into it so that you can see how long there is left, and you need to be able to talk about it, but not in the we've only got so much, we're short of time, or I'm not sure that we've got enough time to. Just be factual. In the 10 minutes remaining, would you like to carry on? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? In the 5 minutes before we agreed to finish, is there more that we can do? Is there more that you'd like to say? Just keep on talking about time and trying to make it in a kind of fairly neutral sense. Time is just a fact, it's not a value, And I used to work, when I was working in nursing, it would often be that people would only say things at the end of a session anyway. Any of you that have ever had counselling will know that, you go in, you sit with your counsellor, you're there for 30, 35 minutes, you've got 5 minutes left, and then you tell them what the problem is. And so it's quite good to keep flagging time up so that you don't end up in that situation where they only finally get to the crunch of the matter just as they're leaving. Because you don't want to leave them there. You don't want to leave them on the top of the mountain. What do we get here? Action. There's all those W's. First step. Is this useful? How do you know? Is this enough? Have we done enough? So, one of the things, even if you haven't got somewhere, people can say, no, that was good enough. Like, this wasn't what we agreed at the beginning, but it was good enough because I've got somewhere that I didn't expect to be, and I'm not where I was. And so I quite like this. So it was good. Is it useful? Should we meet again? I hope the answer is going to be yes. Particularly in my role, if people say no, that's it. We're done. Thanks. But you should. The question should be: should we meet again, rather than when will we meet again? Shall we put another date in the diary? Would it be helpful to talk about this again? Might be a question. Or when we next meet, is this done? And we'll have another meeting and talk about something else. So all of that stuff can be done. Is there anything else? It's always a good question as well. Anything else you want to say? And then this is when they come out with the real heart of the matter. This is you getting your coat on. If you can do all that, then you have had a clear, structured conversation. So your conversations can become more useful if you can use this. So we as associate archdeacons, I'm going to be honest with you, when we did the coaching training, having been hired in order to do a specific task that had a purpose, a management task that we were given to do in terms of transition enabling. and then told, and the way that you're going to do it is through coaching. And then we received this coaching training, and we're like, yeah, but there's no management in it. There's no imposition of tasks. There's no setting an agenda. Like, how on earth are we going to do this? So we all did the training, and I think we were all of one mind, which was, it was very interesting, but we were not intending to become coaches, and we were not intending to offer coaching to the people that we meet. It's still called coaching, I think, on the official paperwork, and it's just, you know, a happy agreement that we've now got, that we call what we do coaching, but it isn't coaching, according to what a coach would call it, because our relationships aren't like that, and our purpose isn't like that. But what we are able to do is to use these skills. We all use them in different ways, but we're able to use these skills in order to have purposeful conversations, and we'll dip in and out of them in order to, you know, take the riches of the coaching toolbox in order to have purposeful conversations. And we've all found that we're really blessed by it. So I didn't say clearly enough at the beginning, but all of this material that we've got here was the Associate Archdeacons, the 5 that are here now, and Ian as well. We all got our heads together, primarily led by Stephen actually, but we got our heads together and worked out what's the kernel, what's the real bit that could change this diocese forever. And this is what we think it is: having purposeful conversations, being able to create a container so that we can grow as disciples and enable others to grow as disciples. It's just gold dust. It's gold dust. So I've got nothing more to offer you at this stage, and I was hoping to be able to dismiss you to lunch, but it hasn't arrived.
It has. It's there.
Oh, is it there? I didn't even notice. So before you go, you all did, yeah. So before you go to lunch, I've got a nice picture of a nice sharing table. So, what we had planned for afterwards was to sit at tables and to discuss these issues, to make sure that you have been able to engage with these 4 questions and to ask any questions that you have got left. And I don't think that this would have been a valuable session if you've not been able to engage with these 4 questions and to ask any questions that you have got. So, here's the question. How do you want to do it? Do you want to eat, think about and discuss these questions informally, and then have a short plenary after the meal? Or do you want to have a plenary now for 10 minutes? Because it's not strictly lunch for another 10 minutes, and I can keep, the hunger will sharpen your senses. You will be so focused. What would you like to do? Or the timetable says we're going to come back and we're going to sit around tables, we're going to chat about these things, and then we'll have a discussion. The other Associate Archdeacons are here. They are happy to offer you their perspectives on this and to answer your questions. Someone make an offer. What would you like to do?
I'd like to have lunch first and do it properly.
Lunch first and do it properly. Sit round a table, have time to think, and then time to ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so there's our first offer. Who's with that?
Yeah.
A small minority. I mean, we can do it won't necessarily take us long. We can still finish early, but we can do it properly. What do you reckon? Do it properly, but take as long as we take. Any other offers? We've had one offer. Sorry? If it's the only offer, then that's what we do. So what we'll do, because we are going to lunch a little bit early, if we come back at 1:30, are there any people here that would really value just a time of silence, of not being talked at or being talked with, who are likely to take advantage of going off for a wander or something? Yeah. So there's at least one. So
Go and sit in the car.
So, are you able to, if there's only one, are you able to find a bit of space over lunch in order to be able to come back before we come back and ready to engage again? Yeah? Okay. So if we engage again at, say, 1:30, we could sit round tables for a bit, and then when you're ready, we'll have a plenary and we can still get out early.
Yay.
Everybody happy? Does anyone want to make a plea for more time? No? So this is your opportunity then to ask questions, to give feedback. I'll get the other associate archdeacons up here as well. Perhaps can you stand at the front here with a lollipop and just we can sit down like a panel. And it might just be worth holding in mind that that was what we were aiming for as well. That hopefully you will have learned these things. But I'll put the questions back up if I can remember how to do it. So over to you.
How intentional do you have to be about articulating that this is the type of conversation you're about to have with the person? I mean, how clear do each side of each individual need to be before you start?
So you could probably get 5 different answers to that. I reckon. So
It depends on the person that you're with, really, but usually I take a fairly light approach. I mean, some of you have coaching from me, I know. So I'll just, start with a bit of general chit-chat. But if you get a feeling there's an issue, say, oh, well, would that be something that's helpful to explore a bit further? Would you like to talk about that a bit more? Or something like that. And just try and pick up naturally rather than say, right, we're here for this session. This is the time when we've only got this to do. You want to do this. I'll try and pick up. And as you build that relationship, that sort of becomes easier anyway. And people know that you're there for a purpose, not just to be friendly. And so people can get into that perhaps a bit more quickly. And maybe even look forward to that and think, oh good, well I've got this natty issue, but I'm seeing Chris next week. Might be able to talk that through and want to get onto it straight away. So it varies on each one. What would other people say?
I tend to agree. I think that generally, if you're meeting with somebody, so if I'm meeting with oversight ministers I work with, we know that we're meeting for a reason, and I would usually ask people, what have they got that they want to talk about, and if I've got things that I think it would be helpful to talk about, I'll say that too, and then we'll have that conversation. So I think it hinges on knowing that you're there for a purpose, and then just being clear between the two of you, what is the purpose for today?
Yeah, I think that question about what would be helpful to talk about is a really good one because it's not weird. It's the whole thing about how you go from what's just happened or what's going on to actually how is something going to happen here now. And so what would be helpful now often unlocks it. And so you don't have to telegraph that now we've gone into a coaching model kind of thing. Because they might say, it would be really helpful to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't happen again, whatever it was that you were talking about. And you go, oh, how might we explore that? And you can just be inquisitive. And you've spotted it, that was the moment. They might not even know that that's what's happening.
The word, the word safeguarding hasn't cropped up today, which I'm surprised because of the nature of what we've been talking about. So just wondered if you could offer some comments about if such issues cropped up in such a conversation.
Anybody want to lead on that?
It's the usual rules. It's not a strictly confidential conversation. So all the usual expectations of our attentiveness to those kind of issues and how we would report onwards as necessary. Perhaps drawing somebody's attention to that if that's appropriate, and saying this is a matter that really we need some additional support with. It's mostly to do with, I'm imagining you're thinking about people's well-being. I don't know whether, so that would be something I think I'd want to agree with somebody how we shared that onwards. I wouldn't want to make that decision for them. But all the usual things apply in terms of expectations.
Yeah, so I would just want to echo that if you are concerned about harm being done to anyone, harm being done to them, abuse, then it's very clear what we have to do. And in fact, you don't even need consent to share it. It may be appropriate to share that you are sharing it, but it may actually not be at that time, but you still have to. If it's a well-being issue, then it is something that you would negotiate. But we talked about, the underbelly of a conversation. It could be that what you spot during this conversation is things are not going well here. There is trouble at this mill and something needs to happen. And so your conversation could be what needs to happen about this. You can still give the power back and care. But you are right that safeguarding should be mentioned every time we get together, because there's no way that we're going to be able to embrace a culture of safeguarding if we don't use the word all the time and it just becomes normal. So, thank you.
On our little table here, the question of how we might use some of these principles in a group setting rather than on a one-to-one basis. How might that work?
So this was offered in the training as being something that was used, and we did use it as part of the 10-week course with 3D, where we used it in a small group setting. It's not that different if you're used to running small groups, in that the same principles apply in terms of how you ask the questions and contain things and negotiate and contract. It's not that different in how you explore, trying to make sure that everyone's included. So you need some small group facilitation skills in order to be able to do it. But we decided when we put this together that we weren't bringing that bit of the training, because it didn't feel as important for the Diocese of Sheffield at this time in this place. It didn't feel like that was likely to be the setting where it would be used most, which is why we're just trying to promote it as when you're having conversations. But if you want to go further, we have got material from 3D. You can find it in other places as well. There is stuff there. It could form another one of these days, how to have a coaching style interaction in a group setting. If that's what everyone wants, we could do it. But
it was mainly in the context of the teams with which we work.
So if you're used to doing things in teams, this can be adapted in your own bespoke way, I guess. So anyone want to add anything?
I guess the only thing I would add to that was really the kind of principle of listening, allowing space, taking each other seriously, having a focus in terms of team and how the team works. So it's more taking some of these principles and adapting them within your team setting.
Can I just clarify, when you're putting your hands up, if you attract Toby's attention and then he'll decide who is going to ask the next question, because at the minute everyone's pointing at different people, so Toby is the arbiter of whose hand gets noticed, so wave at Toby.
It was just going back to the safeguarding thing and thinking about careful listening. Actually, when I was listening to one of those stories, I accidentally picked up something that wasn't even a safeguarding issue because I read too much into something. You'd said something like, I gave the key to the next door neighbour and I think I trust them, and I was like, ding, 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 safeguarding issue. So I suppose it's being mindful as well, isn't it, that we are very open and aware of safeguarding, obviously, but sometimes perhaps we are a bit too sensitive. Well, maybe I am, I don't know.
But that's a good example where part of your response to listening could be to seek clarification. So, but I do want to just caveat that we don't need to seek too much clarification, because the point isn't our understanding, the point is their understanding. But if there is something like that that actually is going to then be a barrier to you being able to carry on listening, because your brain is going, is this safe? Do I need to do something? Then I would seek clarification. I just want to bring you back to this. Can you just explain what you meant when you said that? Just might be helpful.
Angie. The first list of outcomes included help with learning to explore things, I think, and I can't remember what the things were about that. Sorry if I didn't pay attention, but I just can't remember what
So exploring was when you're asking the questions about going deeper. Can you tell me more about this? Is this where we still want to be going? What would be the best way to go about thinking about this now? Would it help if you stood over here? Would it help if you imagined that you were Doris? All of that kind of stuff. So that was what came up under exploration.
Father Richard?
Comments really about that what have you learned, and of course we're all here as people who are co-chairs. That's kind of what we're learning as co-chairs. But what do you learn then if you're the coachee from this? From Stephen from the meetings that we have, because I can go off very easily at tangent, and conversations never seem to. So it's interesting to put yourself in this session as the coachee, as to how, certainly with our associate archdeacons, because now we know what they're doing. The other thing that struck me was the outcome and the noun. Do we really name the outcome, specifically enough, so that therefore we know when we've got there? Because I certainly don't think I'm not aware that I named much of the thing of knowing when we've got there. You look at PCC meetings, don't you? You never make a bloody decision, so we never actually get there. And it's kind of in the DNA of church governance. And my only other comment was about that thing, and I completely get that about who's got the power within a conversation. Completely get that. And therefore the reasons why we say it, and perceived power perhaps. But power might not be a very good word to use, because often sometimes within our congregations we get people who grab power, and even in those meaningful one-to-one conversations, they then abuse that power that you've allowed them. And I suppose it's not about who's got the power particularly, let's just use that word, but they can then abuse that power, and then that conversation isn't a meaningful conversation, it's an attack. Does that make some sort of sense?
I guess there's...
I just don't like the word power, but I get it.
I think it's a good distinction, because I talked about giving the person who is the person who you're facilitating the conversation having the power. But if you remember when I mentioned stokers, that the person sat at the back is the one generating the power, and the one at the front is steering. So I guess it's not so much about power as agency. I suppose who's got the agency in that conversation, that they're able to steer. And all you're doing is powering their conversation. But you're right. If it's a different, these are conversations designed to be purposeful, encouraging, equipping. If it's turning into an attack on you, that is a different type of conversation. And I would not try and coach someone who is attacking you.
So for all our conversations, Stephen, I do apologise.
I think, Alistair, you can also get an answer to the question you asked earlier about whether it's always explicit, from the way Father Richard's just put two and two together.
But in terms of being the coachee, the receiver of it, our hope is that by making this training as widely available as possible, is that actually, as a receiver of this, you could recognise if you're digressing, or if your conversations are wonderfully pleasant, but all you're finding out is where to find cat videos on, or whatever it is. Then you could say, please help our conversations to be a little more purposeful, because it goes totally against my nature for it to do that. And so, knowing what the things are, you could be the person that invites it and say, please keep me on track, Father Stephen, that kind of thing.
Can I add a personal thing? Just in the sense that I was saying to the team earlier that one of the things that these skills and practicing this, both receiving it and sharing it with others, has really helped me with has been becoming a better parent to my 18 and 20-year-old children. who aren't children, they're adults, and learning that, particularly now they live completely separately from me. Those who've got children of a similar age or older will know exactly what I'm talking about. Particularly where there's tough stuff for them to be dealing with, and it's really helped me to be a better person who's journeying with them as they're sorting that stuff out as independent adults, rather than my inclination, which is to be a saviour. Clive named that in part of the presentation earlier. My daughter has no idea that I'm coaching her. I wouldn't call it to that either. It's actually helping me to be much more attentive to who she needs me to be in that conversation. It helps me understand my role. So, however awkwardly and esoteric this conversation has felt at various points today, there are actually some really good life skills that are just about how we journey with one another and become those who build bridges for one another rather than creating barriers.
What a beautiful image, the image of the family. The church becoming more family, more like a household. You know, if these skills will help us to become more like a flourishing, healthy household, then we're kind of on the right lines.
And actually, it works the other way as well, doesn't it? Because there's a lot of households that aren't that.
Yeah.
And how can we help them to become more like that?
Yeah. Anyone think it's a load of rubbish? Anyone? Because, you know, we had, as we were going through the 10 week... Sorry? As we went through the 10-week programme, there were mixed feelings as we went through the 10 weeks about the value of it and the application of it and things. So if you're all really positive now, then it means that we as a team managed to distill the right parts of it, I guess. You know, and the other, you know, I would want to add that I don't practice what I preach. That I've, you know, it doesn't. I've got people here who I meet with, and it hasn't always looked like this. But yeah.
Oh,
David. Are you trying to get David?
Yeah, sorry, David.
David, he's in control.
How do you deal with the issue that we are also pastors, and inevitably the two overlap? So, you know, you can explore with somebody what you think and what you think might be a good idea, and their ideas are awful, or worse, very unchristian.
Yeah.
Their solutions. How do you know, so we're going to go around and get me a crowbar, is the outcome. How do you deal with that role and the pastoral role crossing over?
It's about those explore questions. So that explore section could include a question that says something simply like, and how Christian do you think that looks? Or how much is that making Jesus known? Or you can adapt it and use it as a structure that is explicitly and directly Christian in that sense. So I think you can use elements of this to challenge unchristian behaviour or ideas that are divorced from what otherwise is our broader vision, I think. Is that fair enough?
It is also, though, about identifying. We all wear different hats at different times, and you know, Clive's already referred to that in the training. So some of it is about you've got to wear the right hat for the right conversation that you're having, and you might need to say if somebody's going way off beam, you might have to step out of the conversation and say, I need to put on my other hat here as your vicar, your oversight minister, whatever it is. There may be occasions where it's appropriate to do that. So it's just about the context in which the conversation is happening and the kind of conversation you're having. If it is about transformation, then that's fine. All these techniques are appropriate, but they're not appropriate for every conversation.
I mean, you could say, what do you think I, as your pastor, would say to this plan that you've just come up with? And just let them say what they think, you know, and so you can do it through asking questions. Socrates, the greatest philosopher that ever there was, just asked questions. That's all he did, was ask people questions. And if their ideas were rubbish, he just asked more and more questions until they reached this point of reductio ad absurdum, it's total rubbish, and then their brain would implode, and they made him drink hemlock.
Jesus had a pretty good attitude to using questions,
Well,
didn't he?
Jesus, when he was challenged, he would meet a question with a question. So find the questions, but I think a good one would be, what do you think a pastoral response to what you've just suggested should be? Or Stephen's one, how does that fit with what we understand of the gospel? So you could still be a pastor using a coaching model. That makes sense? Not sure.
I like to think things through, so I hear the argument, yeah. And I get particularly the idea of actions at some points where you just got to say, well, I have to dispense with this role in order to go into the other one. Yeah.
And as they mention crowbars, the next call is to safeguard.
Well, I use the crowbar as a deliberate example because the idea of them keep going off somewhere unhelpful can be very vague, can't it?
Yeah.
But actually,
But you can't lift a drain cover without a crowbar, so sometimes they have their uses. There you go, there's a little saying for you to take away. You can't lift a drain cover without a crowbar. Copyright Clive.